I want to let you know that the Lord knows the address of this church. Okay? I came here about 10 years ago. I was at the wedding of one of my friends, and they were getting married at this church. And I got off the freeway, and I flied out. It was dark. It was getting dark, and I had no idea where this church was at. So I get off the freeway, and I stop at some little convenience store, and I say to the girl there, do you happen to know where the McDonald Road Seventh-day Adventist Church is at? She said, I have no idea. She said, if it's one of these country churches out there in the middle of nowhere, I have no idea. And there was this guy standing over here with his back to me, playing, looking at some candy, and he turns around and he says, oh, you want to go to that Adventist church over there on McDonald? I said, yes, sir. And he said, I know where it's at. Why don't you just follow me? And so I said, sure, So here it is. It's getting dark, getting ready for this wedding. And we followed this guy, and he takes us through these roads. And so my wife looks at me and says, how do you know this guy isn't planning to rob us? I said, I have no idea. So we get to the church here. He drives up into this parking lot over here. And he said, I think this is the place you're looking for. And I said, yeah, it is. I saw the sign. And I looked at him, and I thought in my mind, I sat there and said, I wonder if this is my angel. And he kind of looked at me and he went, okay. And then I said, well, thank you very much. And he turned around, started going back down that driveway of yours, got down to the end of the road. I looked at my wife and I said, I bet you that guy was probably my angel. I've met him before. And I looked around. He had just turned to the left up here at the road, and all of a sudden his car disappeared on the road. I want to let you know, God knows the address of this church. Okay? And my angel knew because he brought me straight here for that wedding. But, makes a great sermon, God knows the address of this church. Is there anything you want to start out with?
Testing, 1, 2, 3. Yep, it works. Okay. We're very privileged and blessed to have Dr. Flechas with us this afternoon. And I would encourage you, if you haven't got the handouts, they're at the back there in the front door. And there's a sign-up sheet for DVDs. And he'll be speaking today and also tomorrow at 9:30 here in the sanctuary. So we're thankful that he is here. He's got a lot of information that will help us health-wise for ourselves, for our families, and for our neighbors. So at this time, I would like Pastor Smith to give us a prayer here for the Lord's blessing on this. And then I'm going to let Dr. Flechas tell us a little bit about himself, and then he can start on in.
I'm glad you're here this afternoon. We learn all kinds of things here in God's house. I have been blessed through many experiences here in this sanctuary. Many of them sermons, but also many of them lectures and other information about soil and gardening. And I see some themes here. Mankind was taken from the soil. And if we have depleted soil, we could have depleted food. So amending one's soil and being aware of the various minerals, trace minerals that are important for health is essential for optimal health. So I'm glad you're here, Dr. Flechas. Pleased to meet you. And let me just offer a prayer as we begin. Our Father in heaven, you have made us fearfully and wonderfully. You stooped low on numerous occasions. when you created mankind, you knelt in the dust and shaped Adam and made Eve. We're thankful for our closeness to you and closeness to the soil. Please bless our conversation and learning today. Help us to understand more about life and health and the good things that you have in store for us. Bless Dr. Flechas. We appreciate his ministry, and we wait anticipating good things from you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
I am a byproduct of Southern Adventist University. I came here back in 1969, graduated in 73, took physics under Dr. Coleman and Dr. Hefferlin. I was a physics major, pre-med. Left this area, went to Loma Linda University, and spent 4 years there doing my graduate training in medicine. I then went to Florida Hospital in Orlando and became board certified in family practice. And I've been practicing, I left Orlando and I moved up to Fletcher, North Carolina, and I've been practicing medicine there for the last 36 years. And it's interesting that the Lord has had a very interesting trail for me. I've tried to leave Fletcher 2 or 3 times, and every time I tried to, the door was slammed flat out in my face. So I've learned to be content where I'm at and let the Lord lead. It's interesting, too, that in my adventures, I ran into a gynecologist who was an endocrinologist, and he is the one who, he specialized in problems of the ovaries. And he was the one to teach me that you can overcome PMS and other ovarian dysfunctional problems with use of trace minerals. He, when I was going through residency, we had a family practice doctor who I asked him, I said, what's the treatment of choice for premenstrual tension, PMS? He said, oh, those women, they just have a Valium deficiency. Just give them Valium and they'll be fine. And so I learned to give Valium for PMS. And it was the doctor in Southern California, his name was Dr. Abraham, one of the children of Abraham, who taught me that the Lord has got, the solution to the problems that we have, and He's already provided the solution. It's just our poor understanding of the solutions. And so he basically started teaching me about GYN endocrinology and so on. And by age 40, I've always been 5'11.5" tall. And at age 45, I was 5'11". I had lost a ½ inch. And so I called Dr. Abraham and I said, what do I do for my height loss? I think I'm in the early throes of osteoporosis, osteopenia. I'm shrinking. And he said, oh, all you need to do is take some boron. And I said, sure. He said, and this was about 1995, right in there. And in 1987, they had discovered that boron was essential for human health. And so he filled me in on all the details, and I said, fine, I'll take this stuff, Well, at age 60, I'm 65, at age 62, I went to Stanford Medical School to talk with some endocrinologists there. And I told them that I was taking boron for my osteoporosis. And they said, sure, you know, you do what you want. You need testosterone. You need this. You need that. And one of them looked at me and he said, look, I got a DEXA bone scan machine here. Why don't you just crawl in there and we'll figure out how much, you know, where you're at with your bones. And so I did. He came back and he looked at me and he said, whatever you're doing, just keep on doing it. You're doing fine. I said, you're not getting off the hook that quick. I said, how bad is my bone situation or how good is it? He said, frankly, he said, when we looked at your skeleton right now, he said, you've got the skeleton of a 20-year-old. Okay? He said, whatever you're taking with that boron, just keep on using it because it's working. Okay? So at that point, you know, I became more of a converter into what was going on with boron, and that gynecologist back many years ago was the one that taught me about boron, and he said, don't forget the lessons I teach you. Well, he died a few years ago, and he used to call me up once a week, and he'd sit and talk to me for an hour. You know, he never had any children, and so there's 3 guys on this earth, 3 men, who he mentored in the field of medicine and so on. And we all consider ourselves the sons of Abraham. Okay? I'm one of them. So when we sing in Sabbath school, I'm a child of Abraham, you know, I'm considering myself one of them. I am a spiritual Israelite. Okay? Now, when we look at boron, this is an interesting topic. Boron is one of the first metals that we run into in the human body. And it's a metal element. It has many properties similar to silicone. And what is interesting is you may say, I thought we were carbon units, that we were made out of carbon. And it turns out that we're actually made out of silicone. And if you take the number one product on the earth is oxygen, number 1 element. Number 2 element is silicone. And if you mix silicone with oxygen, you get silica. Silica is what you know as sand or rocks. And so when you go to nature and you start looking at silica, it turns out there's many different silicas. There's the granite, that's silica. And then there's silica that's called opal. And it turns out that we as humans are made from opal. We are opal. So when he was talking about the Lord took and he made Adam from the earth, he took the opal of the earth and he made us from that. In fact, the difference between you and a baby, the skin of the baby versus yourself, you've all felt a baby's skin. The baby's skin is loaded with opal, whereas we are not as much opal. And in fact, Dr. Abraham used to sit there and say, the answers to our health issues lie within the scriptures. We need to understand where we are in the scriptures. So I said, where is opal in the Bible? And it turns out that it's in Ezekiel 28. Ezekiel 28, God is speaking to Lucifer, and he says, when I created you, you were created from diamonds, from beryl, from this, from that. He'd list off about 8 or 9 minerals. And it's interesting that, and then he tells the devil, he says, at one point, You used to walk in the garden of God among the stones of fire. But he says, but now that sin has been found in you, I have to remove you from the garden of God and remove you from the stones of fire. Do you know which stone is referred to as the stone, what God was talking about, a stone of fire? Which gem is known as the stone of fire? Opals. Folks, when Jesus Christ and when God, the Trinity, looks down and he looks at you guys sitting here, you're a bunch of stones of fire. You're a bunch of opal. And that's what you were created from. And now we understand, now that we now have identified pharmaceutical grade opal, and we have now found out that opal helps to reverse hardening of the arteries, and that opal also makes you very, very mentally sharp. It's almost like a stimulant to the brain, and that's pharmaceutical grade opal. And it turns out that plants use opal, and that's why when you eat a lot of vegetables, you're eating plants that are loaded with opal. And that's why we as vegetarians tend to live longer and have much less problems with hardening of the arteries, less problems with mental diseases because of the opal in the plants. But that's another topic. We'll cover that sometime later. If you look at boron, it's best known for its role in bone health because of its effects on steroid hormones. In the body, the highest concentration of boron is in the parathyroid glands, the heart, the spleen, and the bone marrow. In fact, you have 4 little parathyroid glands here in your neck, and the parathyroids help to control calcium metabolism. And the parathyroids hardly work at all or don't work at all if you don't have enough boron in the body. This is one of the crucial elements of boron is that it helps the parathyroids to help you absorb calcium so you can have good bone health. As you can see here is boron. Here's hydrogen, helium, lithium, boron, carbon, and there's silicon right there. And this whole family, these are important metals that are being used in the body. Boron occurs naturally in the soil and in the water and in the food. In Canada, Canadian adults' intake of boron is about 0.86 milligrams from water and about 2.5 milligrams in the food, with a total of 3.4 milligrams on a daily basis. The half-life of boron is about 21 hours, which means that you take it in and it's being excreted pretty quickly unless the body can use it. But it's excreted mainly through the kidney. Accumulation is mostly in the bone, and a lethal dose of boron is about 15 to 20 grams, 15 to 20,000 milligrams. So you need to know these numbers. And in fact, the highest, you'll notice, look at the soil out here. I know you guys are in a drought, but this area gets a lot of water as compared to Southern California. And the more water you have in the soil and in the water, the more boron leaches out of the soil. The highest concentration of boron in the United States is the Mojave Desert. And in fact, in the Mojave Desert, Southern California, there's a city called Boron, California. Okay? The city of Jerusalem, Jericho, there is lots of boron there. It's a dry, arid area, and there's lots of boron in that area. It gets into the water and in the food. And in Jerusalem, the intake of boron is between 10 and 30 milligrams a day. Here in this area, it's about 2 milligrams per day. In eastern Turkey, the intake of boron is about 56 milligrams per day. And in parts of western China, or China towards Tibet, the intake of boron is up to 128 milligrams per day. So it kind of gives you an idea of the spectrum. If you go down to Jamaica, in Jamaica, the intake of boron is 0. Jamaicans get no boron in their soil, and we'll talk about the medical illnesses that appear in these different areas. There is epidemiological evidence to suggest that the boron intake in Turkey is 29 milligrams per liter, does not cause any overt toxicity. If a person drinks 2 liters a day, that's about 58 milligrams of boron per day. Oral intake of boron is readily and completely absorbed through the human intestinal system, and it's absorbed as boric acid. You take boron, mix it with water, you get boric acid. The ratio of the ratio of boron in the blood as compared to the bone is 1:4, suggesting again that boron is very high in the bone tissues of the body. The bone is a steady state, its steady state is reached within 1 week of giving it, and they were given these rats 3,000 to 9,000 parts per million. The daily intake of boron, that's you folks right here, the daily intake of boron is about 2 to 3 milligrams per day here in the United States. The incidence of arthritis is about 23%. Folks, boron does a few things. Number one, it helps you to absorb calcium. Number two, boron stops development of arthritis. Number three, boron fights osteoporosis. I saw it in this church today as I was walking amongst you. I saw the osteoporosis you guys are suffering from, okay? And I know there's a lot of need for boron right here. In Jamaica, the intake of boron is 0. 70% of Jamaicans have arthritis. The intake of boron in the United States is about 2 to 3 milligrams a day. 23% of us have arthritis. In Jerusalem, Jericho, Palestine, the intake of boron is between 10 and 30 milligrams per day. Incidence of arthritis in that area, 0.5%. And that's arthritis in all categories: lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, etc. So does that tell you something? I take boron at the behest of Dr. Abraham. I've been taking it for since I was 46 years old. When we did some x-rays of my hands just a few years ago, there is no arthritis in my hands. There is no arthritis in my neck. There is none in my back. It pretty much says, and I've been on boron now for about 20, 25 years, about 20 years, and there is no arthritis. We tried to take me off of arthritis for some health issues, and all of a sudden my joint started hurting. And I said, honey, I think we need to get back on boron because my joints are starting to hurt when I don't have the boron in my body. They looked at Chinese workers and they looked at their intake of boron. You will have these people that quote studies in the United States where the intake of boron is 2 to 3 milligram a day, and they say that is normal. What's wrong with that statement? 2 to 3 milligrams of boron intake in the United States is normal for a sick population. Does that make sense? When they sit there and say 2 to 3 milligrams is what's normal, that's normal for a sick people. And in fact, the people, how would you define illness? It's the lack of the illness. So that the lack of, in Jerusalem and in Jericho, the intake of boron is 10 to 30 milligrams a day, and they virtually have no arthritis in those countries. Okay? Same thing is true in Turkey and in Western China. So we find here in these studies that the Chinese were taking in quite a bit of boron, and they found that there was no damage to the sperm DNA or egg DNA, suggesting that these people taking up to 128 milligrams a day, there is no damage to the most sensitive cells in the body. The DNA structures are not being affected. And this should teach you something. If you go back and you read some of the papers that have been written about boron, they'll sit there and say, well, 2 to 3 milligrams, that's as much as you need. It's going to be toxic if you go to 10. Folks, those numbers are based upon rat studies. And what we have discovered is that 60% of all rat studies do not apply to humans. Okay? We are not rats, even though we get treated by certain people that way. But you need to understand that they looked at the issues of arthritis, not just in Jerusalem, but they looked at arthritis in England, Australia, New Zealand, and they found that in Western Australia, where the intake of boron is high, the arthritis rate is, 1%. There's these springs, hot springs in New Zealand, where the hot springs are loaded with boron, and these spas reputedly cure arthritis by having the people drink high doses of boron from the water. So the boron is curative of the problems with arthritis that are in the population. Back in about 1987, we discovered a transporter at the level of the cells in the body. It's called the sodium boron complex. And this transporter has the ability to transport boron into the cells of the body. And what they found is that the fact that that nature, that God built us with a boron transporter, suggests that boron is essential for our health. And that's the key here. The presence of this transporter in humans suggests it is essential for normal body function. And boron appears to have a regulatory role in 26 enzymes, including those involved in energy metabolism. None of them require boron as a cofactor. Boron is essential for normal growth of plants, where it functions involve sugar transport, cell wall synthesis, and DNA. Boron in nature is what helps plants to become more sweet. We're talking blueberries, plums, on and on and on. The more boron there is in a plant, the sweeter the fruit of the plant is. Plums is a classic example of that. Here is some corn This is normal corn grown with lots of boron, the central core where the DNA is at. Look how normal that is. And boron, this is peanuts. And look at boron deficiency in a peanut. Look at the central core where the DNA is at. Look what happens to those peanuts when there's no boron in the soil. That's why we know that that's why we looked at the DNA of sperm and eggs in the Chinese workers who were getting a lot of boron, and we saw no defects in their DNA, and we do find it in plants. Boron is what helps plants to have hairy roots. This is what happens when you put no boron in the soil. Well, you add boron to the soil, you'll see the plants making their hairy roots. This is what happens to the roots of a plant when there's virtually no boron in the soil. Look at this piece of corn. Notice this is boron in corn that has no boron. See how defective the fruit is of the corn cob. And the lack of boron and what happens to the corn cobs with the absence of boron, which says boron is affecting the DNA right at its central core, that is the germ cells that create the plant. The boron, the lack of boron, you get these defective DNAs in plants. You'll see it here. You need boron to make roots, like root crops like beets, sweet beets. But look at the roots of this plant without any boron and what happens with boron. Look at these peas. Notice peas with boron, peas without boron. And so boron very crucial, especially in the agriculture industry. In my area of the world, in Hendersonville, we grow lots of apples. And I've talked to the apple farmers, and they say, you got to put boron on your apple orchards at least once a year, because it's boron that makes the apples sweeter. Lack of boron, your apples don't taste as sweet. Now, boron helps to reduce inflammation. There is now evidence that dietary boron helps to control normal inflammatory processes. Boron serves as a signal suppressor that downregulates specific enzyme activity, and the lack of it, you get increased inflammation. Which is to say, at the turn of the century, back in the year 1890, we had two plants in the United States that were competing for the inflammation market, the arthritis market. One was the bark of the willow tree, from which we make what? Aspirin. And the other one was called the borage plant. And the borage plant was used by the, quote, witch doctors of the American Indians. But we couldn't find out what was it in borage that was helping to reduce inflammation. It wasn't until the 1930s that they finally discovered that borage as a plant, really picks up a lot of boron out of the soil, and that's what was working as the anti-inflammatory. The American Indian witch doctors knew about this long before we figured out what the problem was. And boron insufficiency is related to inflammatory processes, including joint swelling, restrictive movement, fever, antibody production, hemostasis, serine protease enzymes. Look at that word, PSA. What do you guys know about PSA? Huh? Prostate health. It turns out that boron, the more of this enzyme that you have inside the prostate, the more prostate cancer you have. Okay? boron inhibits the making of PSA. And when you inhibit PSA production, you inhibit the ability of the body to make prostate cancer. And in fact, we now know there have been studies been done showing that the higher the boron intake in a society, the less problems with prostate cancer there are. And it goes just like this, where there's lots of boron intake, less prostate cancer, lots of prostate cancer, very low levels of boron. So there is a correlation between these two, and it has everything to do with the fact that boron inhibits an enzyme that helps the body to make PSA. Boron has anti-inflammatory activity when it combines with the amino acids in the body and forms cyanoboranes. And as you can see, the arthritic bone is associated with a 20-fold decrease in boron content. So those bones that have increased arthritis pain, the amount of boron in the bone is 20 times lower than what you would see in normal bone. So that's why we know that boron is crucial towards development of arthritis and the inhibition of the body to make arthritis. Here's the borage plant. At the turn of the century, by 1900, Americans were digging up just about every borage plant they could find because they knew from the American Indians that it worked. And in fact, this plant almost went extinct here in North America because people were digging all these plants up to try to get something for arthritis pain. And it turns out that it was boron. Now there is a type of bone, it's in the mandible, and it's in your lower back and it's in your hips. It's called alveolar bone. And this bone is very susceptible to what happens if you don't have boron. And you will see the alveolar bone becomes a lot more powerful in the presence of taking boron. You will see people who their teeth become real easily falling out in their 20s and in their 30s. And if you see somebody with dentures already in their 20s and 30s, it's because their alveolar bone in the jaw is going bad, number one. Number two, these people are on a fast track towards development of osteoporosis by the time they're in their 40s and early 50s. So if you see people with dentures already in their 20s and 30s, you better be guaranteed that by the time they're 50, they're going to have severe arthritis with severe osteoporosis developing early on in life. And again, it has everything to deal with the issue of how much boron is in the alveolar bone of the jaw. Boron, listen to this, boron supplementation markedly reduces the urinary excretion of calcium and magnesium. As you guys are getting older, you're losing a lot of calcium into your urine. Boron inhibits the loss of calcium from the urine. Some of you have problems with kidney stones. You take boron and the kidney stones go down. The number of kidney stones you make go way down because boron inhibits the loss of calcium into the urine where the kidney stones are being made. Boron is markedly elevated in concentration of the 17-beta estradiol and testosterone. Now, what we are saying here is that there is such a thing called hydroxylation of steroids. A hydroxylation means that you take an OH molecule, a hydroxyl group, and you attach it to a steroid. You'll notice that you've been encouraged lately to be drinking or to start taking vitamin D3. What's the difference between D3 and D2 or D4? It's the amount of hydroxyl groups, the OH molecules that are sitting on the molecule. The more OH molecules you have on vitamin D3, the more powerful the vitamin D molecule becomes. So I checked at one time, because I am taking vitamin D3, and I take boron. I thought, well, I'll just check my boron blood levels. My vitamin D3 level. It was low. And so I said, that doesn't make sense. I'm taking vitamin D3 and I'm taking this boron. But I checked my vitamin D4. It was sky high. I have lots of the end product, which is the most powerful form of vitamin D that you can get. I have lots of that. I just don't have the precursors. Why? Because the precursors are all being pushed into making the end product. I'll give you an illustration right here. Let's see if we can get that here. You'll notice testosterone. Testosterone is biologically inert. It does absolutely nothing. You have to take testosterone and put an OH molecule on the testosterone to turn it into what's called the hydrotestosterone, DHT, and that's the active testosterone molecule. Testosterone by itself does nothing. You have to be able to convert it into its biological form. And what happens is that we have found that boron helps the body to make more testosterone. And in fact, they were selling the high doses of boron at Sam's recently, and it was sitting there saying to help increase your testosterone levels. Well, it's the boron is, whatever testosterone is there, boron helps to promote to make it into the biologically active form. We noticed that boron also helps to give you increased mental health. Now you will notice there is a handout that you should have gotten as you walked in, and the handout basically tells you that boron increases cognition. Your ability to make mental decisions, to be more mentally alert is determined by boron. So boron is crucial towards helping you to understand that your mind works a lot better when you've got plenty of boron. Looks like we've run out of them back there, okay? Okay. Look at the functions of what boron helps you to do. Low boron intake gives you poor mental performance. Hand-eye coordination becomes much more of a problem. Decreased attention, decreased perception. Encoding for short-term memory becomes more difficult. Long-term memory becomes a problem. And people who take boron see an increase in these activities in the body. So when you take boron, you become mentally a lot sharper than you would otherwise. Again, in these studies, this was a study where they actually this was 1990, and they actually gave, in a double-blinded medical trial, you'll notice, again, in the United States, we think that normal boron is 2 to 3 milligrams a day. And that's maybe in rat studies, but for humans, what's more normal is what's going on in Israel, where they are giving 10 to 30 milligrams a day, and that's because they get the boron in the water and in the food. But in this study, they gave 6 milligrams of boron to a group of people who had arthritis. 10 patients were on boron. The results indicated that boron may be beneficial. 10 patients on boron, 5 improved, 5 did not. Only 1 of the 10 patients on the placebo improved. So you can see that, boron does decrease arthritis pain, and you have been told repeatedly, never take Advil, aspirin, those type of drugs at nighttime for arthritis pain, because they will drill a hole in your stomach and you'll wake up vomiting up blood from a hole from your stomach from the intake of aspirin-like products. Aspirin also decreases kidney function. So as you're getting older, your kidney function will decline naturally, but it even accelerates even more in the presence of taking aspirin, Motrin, Advil, any of those families. But there is no decrease in kidney function if you take boron for arthritis pain or for any of those problems, okay? So I'm just letting you know there is an alternative. There is an alternative to aspirin. There is an alternative to these type of things. If you're taking aspirin as a blood thinner, then obviously you use it for that. But for some of us, if you want to get away from the get away from the side effects of aspirin, boron is an excellent choice, and it will not do any damage to you. In fact, it'll give you stronger bones. Here's another study on that. They have found that boron, by its influence on steroid hormones, the boron helps to modify testosterone and estrogen and helps to make them a little bit weaker or a little bit stronger. And it basically, the use of boron, like an estrogen, boron will make estrogen just a little bit weaker so that it's not as powerful. Testosterone, boron will make the testosterone stronger so that you can have more effect from the testosterone in the body. And in fact, they have found that the risk of development of prostate cancer goes down in the presence of taking boron. And so here we find that boron helps to decrease the problems of prostate cancer that we've seen in the population. I mean, folks, I'm looking at you guys and I'm sitting here saying, if you were a typical American, 50% of you will die from a heart attack, period. Okay? You look at our men, 50% of our men will die from a heart attack. What are the rest of you going to die from? Prostate cancer. Okay? It doesn't have to happen. If you start taking boron will help you with your, to help pull down the prostate cancer risk. And we'll talk about that next session. And because we have now found that it's not just boron, it's zinc that helps you there. But what I have seen is that I have a patient who at age 60, he was like 6 foot tall. I tried to tell him about the use of boron, and he just said, you're just my doctor. Take care of me when I get cold or sick or something, but I don't want to listen to this nonsense of yours about prevention. At age 80, the man is now 5'2". In 20 years, he has lost 10 inches of height. I'm 5'11". This guy within a period of 20 years is we're now walking into the office like this. And he's 5'2". He's lost 10 inches of height because he refused to work on prevention to prevent osteoporosis. Personally, I started taking boron at age 45. I'm 65, and I've got the skeleton of a 20-year-old. And I'm still 5'11". I have not shrunk anymore. I'm living proof that this stuff works. But you need to understand that, and it does no damage to your body. It is natural. God provided it for you. It's in the soil. Problem is, you're living in an area where there is no boron in the water or the soil because there's so much water in this area. And in areas of the earth, which is areas where it's more dry, arid land, there's more boron in those soils. And where that happens, the incidence of arthritis, osteoporosis, etc., is almost nil. Why? Because of the high boron in these areas. Now the question arises is, in Israel, the intake of boron is about 10 to 30 milligrams a day. But women of childbearing years should not be taking boron. That is, if you have a woman who gets pregnant, she should not be taking boron, especially if she's got arthritis. But as soon as she gets over the pregnancy, she can go back to the taking of boron. We don't know the effects of boron, 30 milligrams a day, on a developing fetus. However, the Israelis, the Turks, the Chinese are suggesting it doesn't do any damage, doesn't do anything. But here in the United States, we have such a litigious climate that it's hard to justify that unless we can do something about it. So basically, we just say for women who have arthritis and they're in their childbearing years, you can stop the use of boron. If you've already been sterilized or somebody's had their tubes cut, then go ahead and take the boron to help protect your body, because boron will protect you for the long term, for the long haul. As we put on here before, boron helps control the hydroxylation of steroids. You go from vitamin D2 to D3 to D4, D4 being the strongest form of vitamin D. Testosterone turns to DHT, and testosterone helps the body to make nitric oxide. How many of you are keeping up with what's going on with nitric oxide? You're shaking your head, yes? Good. Now, it turns out that there is a gas produced by the blood vessels of the body. It's called nitric oxide. That gas, turns out, is what controls your ability to make hardening of the arteries. When you take nitric oxide, you literally erase hardening of the arteries. Now notice, we are out there taking a drug called statins, Lipitor, Crestor, etc., many statins. These drugs have got tremendous side effect problems. And the statins, if I put any of you on a statin and you have high cholesterol, if I put you on a statin, I can reverse your hardening of the arteries maybe 1-2% within a period of 2 years. That's the most. If I can make you have more nitric oxide, and there's a product out there called Neo40, N-E-O, Neo40. It's made from the nitrates of beets. Neo40 helps to reverse hardening of the arteries by 50 to 100% within a period of 5 years. And it comes from nitrates that are found in beets. the answer to a hardening of the arteries is inside of our food, and it has, and it's not the cholesterol. In fact, there have been 2 studies now that been published within the last 2 years showing that cholesterol, the intake of cholesterol, has nothing to do with hardening of the arteries. Did you hear that? We were fed a lie. And there was we identified the researcher that showed us this. And the reason is that cholesterol, just because you take cholesterol does not produce hardening of the arteries. It's the absence of something else. And so back in the 1940s is when cholesterol was identified as a possible risk factor, and we in medicine took that hook, line, and sinker. They took a whole bunch of apes and monkeys back in 1960, and they gave these apes and monkeys lots and lots and lots of cholesterol. Never could produce hardening in the arteries of any of those primates. Do you know what produced hardening of the arteries in the primates? They took away from the primates all the foods that contain sulfur. You need sulfur to be able to mobilize your cholesterol from point A to point B. Sulfur, if you look at cholesterol is a wax. And you have to be able to mobilize the wax from one point to another. The liver makes 1,000 milligrams of cholesterol per day. You've got to be able to move that cholesterol from this point to that point and so on. How do you do it? You add sulfur to the cholesterol, to the steroid. And what's interesting is that in the primates in the 1960s, they could never induce hardening of the arteries by giving these primates cholesterol. But the moment they took all the foods that contain sulfur out of their diet, all of a sudden the animals started developing hardening of the arteries. Now the question is, what foods are high in natural sulfur? Cabbage. What else? Garlic. What else? Onions. What else? Kale. Okay, what else? Eggs. What happens to an egg if you allow an egg to rot? What does it smell like? It's sulfur. The American College of Cardiology, just within the last 4 or 5 months, has been telling all their clients, all their cardiologists, go back and tell all your patients who have heart disease it's okay to start eating eggs. How do you like that one? Why? Because cholesterol has nothing to do with hardening of the arteries. It's the absence of sulfur. Those nations of the world that have the highest intakes of sulfur in their nation have the lowest rates of hardening of the arteries. And which nations are those? The ones that have active volcanoes. When a volcano starts becoming active, the waters around the volcanoes all of a sudden start emitting a lot of sulfur gas. And that's how you know that the volcano is getting ready to erupt. So countries like Iceland, the Japanese islands, etc., they virtually have no hardening of the arteries. In fact, in Japan, I'm preaching to a bunch of Adventists, but in Japan, 74% of the Japanese men are smokers, and yet the rate of heart disease in Japan is less than 4%. Here in this nation, it's 50%. And what have we been, I came out of the School of Public Health at Loma Linda, and we were all anti-egg, bad stuff. Well, it turns out that eggs contain part of the solution to the problem of hardening of the arteries. It's sulfur, okay? But what else? So basically what I'm encouraging you to do is at least on a daily basis get some foods into your system that contain sulfur. Eat more onions, more garlic, more eggs, more kale, more cabbage, more red beans. Okay? The red bean is very high in sulfur. And in fact, we might even have a cooking school about cooking with foods that contain lots of sulfur. Okay? And we can teach you how to make a good egg salad sandwich. I heard that one. But frankly, it turns out that the latest, and I'm giving you the latest as of just 2 weeks ago, the latest is that we have a sulfur deficiency that's causing our problems. And a lot of it has to deal with the fact of our food preferences. Okay? Now, if you want to, go to Google and type in the word sulfur deficiency. And there's a company, there's a group out of San Diego called the Weston Price Organization. So go sulfur insufficiency, Weston Price, and you'll see the articles that have now been published showing that it's sulfur that's the main problem in hardening of the arteries. That hardening of the arteries is going to kill at least half of you in this church. The other half, for the men, they're going to die from prostate cancer until we start putting you on boron and zinc. Okay? So I'm just, but the key to a lot of this is the nitrates that we get out of beets. And those nitrates help the body to make nitric oxide. And nitric oxide, remember that term, because this is the stuff that reverses hardening of the arteries. So remember that boron takes inactive testosterone and makes it biologically active into DHT by the effects of boron helping the body to make hydroxyl groups, which then help the body to make DHT. And so we'll take a 15-minute break. For those of you who are new to the church, there's bathrooms back to the back and to the left and to the right. And we'll take a 15-minute break, and then we'll get back together again.